It seems every relative or family has some relations or two that make things very interesting for the rest of the clan. The grandpa who marches to his own drummer, or the auntie that never quite fit in with the family. I was looking for some stories of strained family relationships as a way to introduce what we'll be talking about today. And what I found was a large assortment of accounts, some heartbreaking and some a little bit more humorous. One man found out the truth about his great uncle, a highly respected resident of a small town and a deacon in his church. When the great uncle died, the family went through his things in the attic. In an old chest, they found documents, lists of members, and the purple robes of a KKK Grand Dragon. It turns out the uncle had been a clandestine member of the Ku Klux Klan. But here's a more lighthearted account of which offers an explanation for why this particular man's family line was split between the land of Iowa and the land of Virginia. He says, half my family lives in Virginia while the other relatives live in Iowa because, back before the Civil War, a relative we all refer to as Uncle Raz was late for supper. He was afraid that his mom would beat him senseless, so he took a shortcut through a field. He got halfway through the field when a bull started to chase him, so he climbed a tree. Still afraid to be late for dinner, he shot the bull, dead. He did make it home in time for dinner, but the next day he ran away to Iowa for fear of the neighbor who owned the bull that he shot. Uncle Raz started a family there, and that's why our family has relatives in Iowa and Virginia. Family relations can be very complicated. Those who are expected to get along just can't pull it together, while those who are so different from one another seem to remain friends no matter what family drama comes their way. Last Sunday, we walked through nearly 2,000 years of Bible history, and the goal was to understand the origin and the uniqueness of one family line, Israel, because God has a future for Israel. What's taking place now in the current conflict is part of a larger past and part of a larger plan for the years ahead. Now, it's common knowledge that the tension between the Jews and other nations has been an issue for their entire existence. What gets lost in all of the chaos is a very simple reality. We are witnessing a battle between those who share a family line. While all of us trace our ancestry back to Noah, many people groups in the Middle East trace their ancestry back to Abraham, who came from one of Noah's sons. So today, we return to the Old Testament to trace another branch on the family tree that developed at the same time as Israel. Let's start with the Table of Nations that was created after the flood. Once Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives disembarked from the ark, they formed into family groups. A little over 100 years later, the incident at Babel took place. At one time, the whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. And they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower, with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves, otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." Now, their attitude was in direct violation of the creation mandate to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So God interrupted their plans, confused their languages, and scattered the nations throughout the world. The 3 sons of Noah became the start of 3 people groups that eventually divided into many people groups, which are listed in Genesis 10 and 11. These are the family records of Noah's son, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They also had sons after the flood. While there were some exceptions to this pattern, Ham spread throughout what is now Africa, Japheth spread throughout Europe and Asia, and Shem settled in the Arabian Peninsula. Abraham and the people of Hebrews came from the line of Shem. Nations that developed from the other 2 sons included some that were particularly wicked, and they created ongoing trouble for their cousins in the line of Shem. Here are some that you might remember from reading through the Old Testament. The sons of Ham included Canaan. And a century later, as Israel entered the Promised Land, Joshua fought against at least 5 of these nations, which also descended from Canaan: the Hittites, Amorites, Jebusites, Girgashites, and Hivites. Since so many sons of Canaan settled in this region, you can see why the area is called Canaan. And one other well-known people group that gave Israel a lot of trouble in the same area was the descendant of one of Canaan's brothers. The sons of Ham included Mizraim. Mizraim was the father of the Philistines. We'll come back to the Philistines another time. You've probably heard Western voices characterize the conflict in the Middle East as racist. We are told that it's not racist to hate the Jews, but it is racist to call out any sins of any nation that is Israel's enemy. Not only is that blatant hypocrisy, but the whole argument of multiple races is a lie at its core. And God made from one blood every race of men to dwell on the face of the earth. Adam is the father of all of us, like it or not. Consequently, there's only one race and one blood, the human race. As his kids, we share the damaged nature that he brought into creation. So what we witness in any conflict between two people or two people groups is actually a problem in family relationship, a conflict between family lines. In the Middle East, that's often more accurate to say. Now, since the flood, Noah is the one that all humans trace their ancestry back to. And from Noah, we each came from one of the lines of his three sons. Since so many of us have a non-Jewish background as Gentiles, we mostly likely draw our family line from either Ham or Japheth. These are the clans of Noah's sons, according to their lines of descent within their nations. From these, the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. They have done so right up to the present moment. But it's only through one of Noah's sons that the promises would be fulfilled. That was Shem. And it's from his name that we get the term Semite. Now, as we follow the family line of Shem down several generations, we come to Abraham. Noah was Abraham's great-grandfather times 8. Shem was Abraham's great-grandfather times 7. Now, I never dug into the genealogies very much before, but it was fascinating to me to see in graphic form the lifespans of the names that we read in Genesis. You know, it took a while for the long lifespans to drop down to what they are now, 80 to 100 years of life. So as you look at the chart, Noah was still alive, just as Abraham was being born. And Shem was alive for over 100 years after Abraham grew up and eventually traveled to the Promised Land. Last week, we looked at Abraham's crucial role in being the start of a new nation, as we looked at Genesis 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." From this starting point, we have a commitment from our Creator to Abraham and his descendants that include the promise of land, seed, and blessing. And if you remember, this initial promise to create a nation for himself was further clarified by additional promises. God's covenant would include a line of kings and the promise of a new nature, a new heart. Someday, through Adam's bloodline, a king would be born. He would rule over Israel and all the other nations in righteousness and holiness forever. And that king would bring with him the transformation of sinful, stone-hardened hearts to be replaced with hearts that only desire what God desires. Yet before the nation gets started, Abraham's life and marriage took a few unpleasant turns. He was 75 years old when God spoke to him in Genesis 12 about becoming a great nation. That meant having children. So after 10 years of living in the land of the Canaanites and the Philistines, his wife offered him an option. Abram's wife, Sarai, had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, "Since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family." And Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband, Abram, as a wife for him. Now, when you have more than one person that can claim the status of spouse, trouble inevitably follows. And as soon as this exchange took place, there was serious tension between the two women. He slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she realized that she was pregnant, she treated her mistress with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You're responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and ever since she saw that she was pregnant, she has treated me with contempt. May the Lord judge between me and you." What Sarai said is actually a bit stronger than it sounds here. Sarah said, "May the violence done to me be on you." And the last time this word was used in Genesis to describe the condition of the earth was when Noah's flood was about to happen. It's safe to say Sarai is probably exaggerating a little bit, and of course Hagar is not making it easy. Yet consider Hagar's position. She was probably brought into Abram's family a few years earlier when Pharaoh gave Abram riches, animals, and maidservants. And during that same time, Hagar has shared in the company and blessing of Abram's family. She's also been hearing stories of the promised one for years. Now Hagar is potentially carrying the promised one. It's not hard to claim bragging rights, especially when you were handpicked to participate in the entire process. And yet the tension between them is enough that Abram intervenes with Sarah. "Your servant Hagar is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so Hagar fled from her. There's no excuse for Sarah to turn violence back on her maidservant, yet God has plans for both these women. And the Lord sent a messenger to meet Hagar as she appears to be running back to Egypt from which she came. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was in the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." Now there's a separate sermon here about enduring trouble, suffering, and even mistreatment in order to wait for God's timing on God's blessing, but that's for another day. Even though her life was oppressive and difficult under Sarah, the Lord had a bigger plan if Hagar would get on board. And that plan offers Hagar great encouragement. Watch God's grace in this next exchange. Hagar was someone who was not seen or heard by Sarai, and yet God's gracious reaction is to both see and hear her situation and make her her own promise. The angel added, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." And in a moment of praise and gratitude, Hagar names the well where God met her. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. "You are the God who sees me," for she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Be'er La'e Roi. It's still there between Kadesh and Bered. This is a beautiful demonstration of God's presence in an unpleasant situation. But it's also a reinforcement of the Abrahamic covenant from Genesis 12. Blessing comes through being aligned with Abraham. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave him the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. His name means God hears. Years later, when Sarah was now 90, she finally had a child with Abraham. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time God had told him. Abraham named his son who was born to him, the one Sarah bore to him, Isaac. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. By God's design, Isaac would be in the line of promise, and the repetition of the names here is intentional. It reinforces for us as listeners that we're following one family line. Isaac, son of Abraham and Sarai, nobody else. And here's another interesting thing about tracing the Genesis genealogies at this point. When Isaac was born, great-grandpa times 7, Grandpa Shem, a survivor of the flood, was still alive. We have no way to know if Shem ever met the son of promise. But now, by this time, both mothers have bragging rights, but for different reasons. The firstborn, Ishmael, versus the firstborn of promise. Even so, the tension between the two women didn't change. And by the time Isaac was around 2 or 3 years old, the family held a great party. Even with her own son, Sarah was tired of the competition between herself and Hagar. So Sarah begged Abraham to send Hagar and her son, Ishmael, away. Ishmael was somewhere between 15 and 17 at the time. In addition to the moms fighting, the firstborn, Ishmael, created tensions with the preschooler. But Sarah saw the son mocking her son. The one Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham, just so we know who's who. So she said to Abraham, "Drive out this slave with her son, for the son of this slave will not be a co-heir with my son Isaac." Now, this was a very difficult thing for Abraham because of his son. That's a reference to Ishmael. Abraham loved him. And yet is an example of what happens when you try to get ahead of God's plan and God's timing. And there's plenty of sermons that apply that lesson as well for another day. Yet to end the conflict, there doesn't seem to be any good choices that can be played out to avoid additional pain for somebody. Even so, God would keep his promise to both family lines. The Lord had said that the Abrahamic covenant would be carried through Isaac, not Ishmael. At the same time, included in that covenant was God's promise to bless the offspring of Abraham. Ishmael was Abraham's son, just as much as Isaac. In fact, another promise was given to him just after God changed his name. Your name will no longer be Abram, but your name will be Abraham, for I will make you the father of many nations. I will make you extremely fruitful and will make nations and kings come from you. So let me back up for a moment. Just before God confirmed once again that Sarah would have a baby within the next year, the Lord spoke to Abraham. With another son on the way, Abraham realized the implications for Ishmael, and he prayed to God about it. And then we hear God's response in chapter 17. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will certainly bless him. I will make him fruitful and will multiply him greatly. He will be the father of 12 tribal leaders, and I will make him into a great nation. So God kept his promise to extend grace to Hagar and her son as they're leaving. At that point, the Lord spoke to Abraham again. God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up, take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got him a wife from Egypt. Now from there, we fast forward to Genesis 25, where we read, this is the account. This is the genealogy. This is the history of Abraham's son Ishmael. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jeter, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael. And these are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Altogether, Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the border of Egypt, as you go to Asher. Now, this short history is given to us to finish in the Bible the account of Abraham. and moved the attention down to the lines and generations of both his sons, Ishmael and Isaac, along with the territories that go along with them. But this short history also sets up an expectation. If God fulfilled his promise to Ishmael, who was not in the line of promise, how much more will God fulfill his promises guaranteed through Isaac? The area where Ishmael's descendants began to settle is marked on the map. They went east and south of the promised land to the Arabian Peninsula and down towards Egypt as well. And they multiplied, as God said they would. And yet there is a characteristic that the Lord identified that would be inherent in the line of Ishmael based on the father, Ishmael. And that characteristic would not be a blessing to the nations around them. As only God can do, he looks down through history to reveal the legacy that is yet to come. And in order to appreciate that one characteristic, let me take you to the Christmas account when the angel came to visit Mary about the child that would be born. And then I would like to compare that account with the one concerning Hagar's child in Genesis 16. Now, if you think you remember the Christmas account from Luke chapter 1, you are free to call out what I should fill in the blank. The angel said to her, "Fear not." Oh, come on, guys. You've heard the Christmas story. "For you have found favor with God. You will give birth to a son." Okay, we're getting there. "And you shall name him," oh, come on, Jesus. All right, we're going to go back to Sunday school again. "He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord will give him the throne of his father David, and his kingdom will have no end." Now, let me take you back to a couple of verses from Genesis that I purposely left out. Those verses describe the character of Ishmael in a way that sounds very similar to what we just read. As the angel comes to Hagar to tell her about the child that would be born, we read in Genesis 16:11, "The angel of the Lord said to her, 'Behold, you are with child, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. He will be a wild donkey of a man. He will be against everyone, and everyone will be against him. And he will dwell opposite all his brothers.'" The word opposite is one that has many meanings, including standing in front of someone, face to face. It serves as a description of the location of Ishmael's descendants as they lived facing one another in the east. And yet at the end of Ishmael's account in Genesis 25, we read the same word. He lived in opposition to all his brothers. The composite picture of Ishmael is one who will live in opposition, defiance, and hostility against everyone and with everyone against him. And so it gives us some insight into the conflict between Israel and the other sons of Abraham throughout the Old Testament. Yet according to both Jewish and Islamic tradition, Ishmael is considered the starting point of what later became the Arab nations, particularly within the Muslim faith. The prophet Muhammad claimed Ishmael as his ancestor. Muslim Arabs, following Muhammad's example, claim descent from Ishmael, and that Ishmael and his mother Hagar are buried in the Kaaba at Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Now, the connection between Ishmael and current Arab bloodlines has been debated for centuries. And which nations or which parts of nations can actually trace their ancestry to Ishmael is also uncertain. I'm sure DNA testing could clarify a few things. Even so, certain people groups continue to see Ishmael as their line of ancestry. However, not all of them can be certain that that's the line they come from, even though Abraham was involved. And here's another reason. Because Abraham was the father of many nations, which included a third wife, also outside the line of promise. You see, after Hagar was sent away and Sarah later died, Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. The Midianites were one group that started off well enough in the days of Moses. In fact, Moses married a Midianite, and his father-in-law, Jethro, was from Midian and worshiped the same God of Abraham. But as God's people 40 years later were about to enter the promised land, the Midianite relationship went south as they joined with other people groups in the area, also descendants from Abraham's line and from the other two brothers of Shem, and they created trouble. So when it comes to who is who, Keturah's descendants settled in the region as well, so it makes it a little bit more complicated. And as Abram was near the end of his life, Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines. But while he was still alive, he sent them eastward, same direction, away from his son Isaac, to the land of the east. And so Keturah's sons became the fathers of the Arabian tribes living east of Israel, which would be modern-day Jordan and Syria and such. Now, identifying who's causing trouble to whom in the Middle East today gets even more complicated as we add in one more family rift. Not between Isaac and Ishmael, but between the children of Isaac and Ishmael. You may remember the story of the twin brothers. Jacob tricked his brother Esau out of his blessing and his birthright. And then Jacob ran away for fear of his brother's revenge, which was coming, by the way. As soon after that, Esau left home in defiance and disgust with his parents, particularly to get away from his parents' instruction to stay away from the Canaanites. Esau took his wives from the Canaanite women. Esau realized that his father Isaac disapproved of the Canaanite women, and so Esau went to Ishmael, his uncle, and married, in addition to his other wives, Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son. She was the sister of Nebaioth, Ishmael's firstborn. So part of Abraham's line returned to another part of Abraham's line, and at some point Esau married another sister, by the way, of his uncle Ishmael. And so from there, Esau, also known as Edom, became the father of the Edomites, and another one of his descendants became the father of the Amalekites. So in one more branch of Abraham's family tree, we obtain a couple more people groups that stand against the promised line. 6 ways to Sunday. There were nations and states that formed and stood against Israel. And most of these groups have long disappeared from the earth or were assimilated into other people groups. But in the days of Abraham, right up to the days of the kings and prophets, individual groups or alliances between these groups gave trouble to God's people, a period of about 1,500 years. Now, Abraham was the first one to encounter this when he had disputes over the wells of water and certain land areas. Then Joshua, as he came into the land, encountered it as he tried to acquire most of the territory as God had commanded him. But even up to the line of the northern and southern kingdoms falling because of other nations, these cousins stood against the line of promise. So it's easy to look at the Middle East and watch certain nations consistently show contempt for the Jewish people right now. Well, many come from the line of Ham or Shem. And as far as bloodlines go, Shem, the Semites, are the closest cousins to Israel. And yet, in some bizarre twist of evil, anti-Semitism only seems to apply to the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But if you are truly anti-Semitic, you would have to hate all the sons of Shem, which include all the nations of the Arab people. Now, I doubt if our American protesters who despise Israel have any clue that that's true. Now, as believers, we need to remember that the conflict between people in the Middle East is about something larger and deeper than genealogy. Consider the sons of Japheth, the third one, which we really haven't talked much about. He became the father of the nations of Europe, most of our ancestors. While we're focused on the conflict between Hamas and Israel, the non-Arab peoples have also long treated the Jewish people with opposition and contempt. In 19 AD, Rome expelled them from the capital. You can read about it in the New Testament. In 135, Jerusalem was destroyed once and for all. This was years after the temple, but the Jews were expelled and forbidden to return by the emperor. We had the Crusades. What we may not know about the Crusades is the Christian soldiers, quote unquote, did not distinguish between Jew and Muslim in their killing. And there's some horrors that went into that whole thing. In the Middle Ages, the Jews were required to have special markings. In Germanic nations, they humiliated them by wearing pointed hats, very appropriate for this week. In England, a couple of kings, spanning a few centuries, required yellow badges to be worn. France, they wanted a circle emblem out of yellow, red, or white material, and as early as 7 years old, you might have to wear that. And then Rome had a red cape for men, a red apron for women. In 1290, England expelled many. In the 1300s, France did the same. In the 1300s, they were banished from parts of Spain, Germany, Austria, and the Black Death was blamed on them. In 1492, you know that date. Yeah, well, something else happened. Spain expelled all of the Jewish population. In 1492 to 1497, Sicily, Lithuania, and Portugal got rid of people. Then Russia carried out pogroms against them. 70 to 250,000 were killed. In 1941, you're probably not familiar with this one, but the Babi Yar massacre in 2 days killed 34,000 Jews at the beginning of the invasion from Nazi Germany. And of course, you know what happened with the Holocaust. But just this Thursday, I watched an update on the Hamas-Israel war that gave this report from the Anti-Defamation League. It was on the news, and then I checked it out through Reuters. The advocacy group, Anti-Defamation League, data showed a 388% rise in anti-Semitic incidents in the United States between October 7 to 28 or 23 over the prior years. If you compared those 2 weeks to this 2 weeks a year ago, that's how it's changed. From Genesis 21, we are told to expect conflict within and between the family lines of Abraham. And some 4,000 years later, we still get to witness that. The Arab nations continually vie for position and battle one another for a variety of reasons. So the Old Testament description of Ishmael as one who stands in opposition and defiance and hostility gives us some insight into the ongoing infighting between those descendants, whoever they might be. And yet in the bigger picture, each person or people group or political group that stands in defiance, opposition, and hostility towards Israel are those who are living out the character of Ishmael. That's a spiritual issue, not a political one. And whether they know it or not, their disdain for the people of God is a reflection of their rejection of God. It's of little consequence, really, if we're looking at individuals or entire nations in the East or the West. For those who are looking to destroy Israel, they come from the line of Shem or Ishmael, or from one of the other nations, or the two sons of Noah. None of that really, really matters. What matters is how we respond to the promise given to Abraham in the first place. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Our response to this promise is a spiritual one. What terrorist groups like Hamas or Hezbollah are doing reveals a spiritual issue. The American protesters promoting rebellion and death reveals a spiritual issue. The individuals who are harassing American Jews in local neighborhoods with their anti-Semitic hatred reveal the same spiritual issue. Each one stands in a long line of those who reject the authority of God to determine world events as revealed in His Word. And at the core, they reject this promise of God, that God will look after the people He calls my own. As part of my research, I called Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry in South Jersey. They're a Bible-believing, Bible-centered organization to reach Jewish people for Christ in the United States and help Christians know and appreciate reaching out to the Jewish people with the gospel. Friends of Israel also offers direct support to and the message of salvation to Israelis in the nation. And so I asked the question that I knew always comes up when some kind of trouble comes to Israel. Why should believers support Israel or Jews if they're not perfect? Now, we live in a time where we are told that we have to choose between two options, which are not contradictory. Either love the people of Palestine or love the people of Israel. You can be concerned for both, for different reasons. And you can be in support of something greater than what is, even when those involved are flawed, just like the rest of us. On some level, desiring God's blessing for Israel is not about how nice or how mean they are. Check out their history. They did some pretty terrible things as they turned away from their covenant relationship with the Lord. But any support or allegiance or prayers that we offer for them is about God's will and plan for them. So the answer I was given was the one I expected to hear. When you are in support of the Jewish people and their nation, you embrace the promise God gave in Genesis 12. You honor the relationship that he formed with Israel, independent of a relationship with anybody else. Until the promised one returns, Israel will not be perfect any more than any other nation will be. So that approach is the wrong starting point to determine any support or lack of support for the Jewish people. The right starting point is the promise of God. And it's so basic. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Period. The promise for the nations found in this text is based on a very simple alliance. Do you want to live in opposition to those God loves, or do you want to be in line with God's design? Those who bless Abraham's line of promise, the Jews, will be blessed in some way, shape, or form. Those who do not will not. A 3-year-old can understand that. And it's actually a terrible tragedy that the enemies of Israel reject this basic premise. There could be greater peace in the Middle East if the nations and people that stand against them would rethink their position. But that requires the leaders and the citizens of those nations to know God's word. And we're right back to individuals in every people group coming to know the Messiah. Embracing the gospel, faith alone, in Christ alone as Messiah, is the only pathway to peace. Think about that when you want to pray for peace in Israel. Pray for the salvation, put the peace aside. It's going to come naturally if somebody gets saved. As a result, the nations and the individuals that do not honor that relationship, which God has established with his people, the ones who will not believe in this promise, they have placed themselves in opposition to God. You can't get blessed there. And since the gospel message is the only pathway to peace, Israel, as a people group, will not find peace either until Jesus returns and they realize who he is. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often have I longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings? You are not willing? So look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Even so, even though Jesus said this, and even in the middle of all the trouble or all the trouble that may come, God's going to look out for his nation because they belong to him. Our study of the tension and contempt between people groups and one another reinforces a greater genealogy that we should keep in mind. We are all sons of Adam and Noah. We all share a bloodline that's been damaged. And modern DNA research has confirmed what God said about our ancestry since the Tower of Babel. In 2009, a completed study revealed this. All of Earth's people, according to a new analysis of the genomes of 53 populations, fall into just 3 genetic groups. I think we know who they are. Our study of the tension and contempt between one group and another reveals something else about our bloodlines. We all need the promised one to save us from ourselves. And so when you talk to people about this issue, you have to have in mind, if you don't actually verbalize it, do you desire God to bless or not? And the answer would be, if you do, then get in line with the Abrahamic covenant. Treat well the people of God called Israel. Father, thank you for a chance to review this complicated history. Thank you for giving it to us in the first place, so that the things that we encounter today are not as mysterious, but we can see your hand and fingerprints throughout history, leading to a place where all of your promises will come true. For us as a church, and for your people of Israel as a nation, and for us combined together in one new community that worships Christ forever. Father, please bring conviction of heart into the nations of the Middle East beyond Israel, that they would recognize or be hungry or curious about their own past, that they would be drawn to your word, not to the scriptures that they claim are true from whatever religion they come from, but the real book. And Father, I pray that you'd give tremendous capacity to those ministries that are in those places, in the nations that forbid the Bible, finding ways to access, smuggle in, and present the truth of who Christ is, so that peace may come at least to the hearts of those who know you, even if they have to die for it. And Lord, we do look forward to the day when your Son comes back and reigns in peace and righteousness. So Father, give us the ability to live for that day in our attitudes and interactions with people around us, representing the Christ of the New Testament, the Messiah that is still to come. Amen.